I'm gonna start the live stream, and when it's up, we'll go ahead and get started. Apologies. And we did have some folks in the attendee space. Welcome, everyone. Ruby will get the deck up in a moment. Apologies, we were having some tech issues. This is the 7th meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee's Budget Work Group and the 11th meeting of the Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee. Today is Tuesday, August 27th, and we'll be here from 11 till 1 o'clock. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Our co-chairs, Destiny and Terry, are going to facilitate today's meeting. I'm just going to go over some meeting logistics. This meeting is being live streamed, and a recording of the meeting will be posted on the transition website under past meetings and events. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that folks in attendance can view the chat. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For any community members participating, we have a Zoom Q&A feature available. You can submit questions or comments in the Q&A function. At today's meeting, we're not taking verbal public comment, but you can submit public comment at any time through our comment form online by calling 311 or by emailing transition@portlandoregon.gov. If you want to give verbal public comment, you can sign up to do so at the next meeting of the full Government Transition Advisory Committee on September 11th. Perfect slide, Ruby. Thank you so much. Terry, I'm going to pass it to you to review the agenda. Thank you.
All right, welcome everybody. Today's agenda here, we're going to spend the meeting discussing revisions to our draft recommendation to future city leaders. We're going to do this in two parts, as you'll see on the agenda. We're first going to discuss areas identified for further discussion that kind of need some work. Those are the district offices, council committees, and non-agenda communications. And then we're going to discuss any remaining revisions. It's a long 2-hour meeting, but before we're done, we're going to vote on the recommendations and review next steps. These recommendations will be forwarded to the full GTAC for their approval, of course. But today we kind of need to get to yes. So that's where we're headed. Next slide. Okay, next slide, please.
Can y'all see my screen, please?
We can see your screen, but we're looking at the meeting agenda. Terry, for the sake of time, do you want to keep going and we'll...
Sure. The next slide says subcommittee business on it. And so the subcommittee business is essentially Lori's unable to attend today. Otherwise, we expected everybody to be here. There we go. We need to approve the July 30th meeting summary. So does anyone have any revisions to that before I take a motion to approve that summary? Tick, tick, tick. I see no revisions. So can somebody move their approval?
Sure, I will.
Zach will.
I'll second.
Amy seconds, I think. Any objections? I see none. We'll just consider those passed. Next slide, please. Okay, these are our working agreements. Because we have a tight agenda, I'm going to skip reading them. If you need to refer back to them, you know where they are. So next slide, please. And then the next slide, there we go. Okay, so here's, again, some background on how we got to this point. The idea here is we're going to make final recommendations at the full GTAC meeting in mid-September. So today we're doing our subcommittee work to forward those recommendations to the GTAC meeting. After today, we will distribute the revised recommendations for you to review. Any further edits will be due to us on Monday, September 2nd. The document that gets distributed to GTAC on Wednesday, September 4th. And then on September 11th is the GTAC meeting. So that's a really tight schedule. And we will need to do our work today to get that done. And then you all will have, if there's any residual homework, we're going to have to get that done right away too. So that's our timeline that we're looking. Next slide, please. And Destiny comes up next.
Thank you, Terry. We're just a little bit behind schedule by 5 minutes. But in mid-July, members were given an engagement to date report. Based on those reports, members discussed revisions in late July that have been incorporated into the document, which was seen in red. Since that meeting, members have proposed revisions based on the engagement report provided partway through our engagement period. Last week, you were provided the final engagement report that included the data from 189 more surveys, additional listening sessions, 2 more policy discussions, and 3 more city briefings. We now want to propose and discuss revisions based on that engagement report. This is not the time to repeat what we've already discussed as a group in the previous months and that were included in our GTAC recommendations. We want you to consider how your thinking has changed based on the internal and external input. We only got time for 1 roll call at the end. So if something needs additional wordsmithing, staff and chairs will work on that after the meeting to get it right in the draft. We'll take temperature checks along the way, but if anything is a deal breaker causing a no vote on the full recommendations, that we need to know so that we strike it off from our roll call vote. Next slide, please. As Terry mentioned, we are going to take revisions in 2 parts. This section is focused only on 3 areas identified for further discussion, which are district offices, council committees, and non-agenda item communications at council. After we discuss these 3 items, we will move to all the other ones. We have about 15 minutes for each of the 3 areas, so Terry will help keep us on track with time. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to begin our discussion with district offices. Members have sent in 3 proposed revisions. I'll pause for about 20 seconds so that folks can review those proposed revisions now. Okay. Before we discuss the revisions on the slide, does anyone have additional revisions based on the final engagement report? Fred, I see your hands raised.
Oh yeah, it's just on this district offices, the screen in front of us.
Yes.
Are you ready?
Let me pause in case anyone else has any new revisions. Okay.
Okay, it seems like the first 2 bullets are redundant. It could be restated. I mean, it just are maybe just stop at the first bullet with a district specific lens, or with districts specific lenses, period. And then second bullet, recognize that District 1 needs something more profound than other districts and town hall community centers needed there. And then I don't understand the third bullet. Is that something we're to write, Julia's to write? What are we going to provide a more succinct recommendation from what we know from our research? What was
These are just revisions or suggestions brought forward by GTAC members individually. So there is a common thread between those first two.
Okay, I just don't know how that would be worded. If there's one that someone has drafted, that's great. I'd like to look at it.
Okay, thank you, Fred. I will pass it off to Joe.
I just saw Julia's comment in the chat that each of these are comments from individuals. Presumably, those are
Oh.
individuals who are here today. And so when we get to one, maybe the person who made that recommendation could speak to it first and help us understand exactly what they have in mind so we can respond instead of trying to imagine what they might have meant from reading it.
Okay.
Harry?
Yeah, some additional perspective as to where we are here. We have a recommendation on district offices, right? And it's not word for word, but it's something like, we are going to leave this decision to the future council to make. There's going to be, we hope, lots of community engagement around that to determine what the programming is. I think that was the gist of our current recommendation. And this discussion is responsive to people who want to perhaps change that. And so that's where we are in the process. And if there are changes, you want to change that recommendation that we currently have, now is the time to do it.
Thanks, Harry. I put my hand up. For me, I provided the first bullet point. I think my proposal is to revise our current recommendation of lo-fi in district offices by the start of the council to reiterate that ongoing programmatic need and something more robust in District 1. So that's where that comes in, is that would replace what we currently have approved as. And then I will pass it to Amy and then Juanita.
Just to understand, are we going to come to terms about how we want the revisions to be, and then we'll send it to the subcommittee to do the revisions, or now we're going to decide about specifically the revisions and that's going to be that?
We're going to decide which revisions we're taking. Let us know if there's any of these proposed that you're like, that's a no, cut it off, because we have one roll call at the end. So the ones that stay, we will wordsmith those and send you the draft so that any final edit tweaks can be made via email.
Okay, yeah, I would just add that we could rework 1 and 2 to be a little bit clearer, with, again, the first one just being the ongoing programmatic needs for community engagement, because that's something we heard loud. And then the second one being that recognizing that District 1 has a specific need in 2 bullet points.
Thank you, Amy. Juanita?
Yes, I just wanted to, and I'm not so sure if it's a question, but there is other recommendations that regarding district offices. For example, there's a recommendation that I made regarding the fact that they should consider subcontracting in the districts, and each of the districts with private not-for-profit to conduct the community engagement in the district. So are we going to collect all of the recommendations by area, by
Yes.
issue? Yeah.
Juanita, it's later on in the slides.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes. Juliet?
I'm just thinking about the third one and trying to visualize how we could be more succinct without sacrificing content, because there's so many variables and so many unknowns at this point. I'm just struggling to figure out how we would do that without glossing over some of what we've learned. So that's all.
Can I speak briefly to the third bullet because I know where it came from, and it came from Lori, who's not here. And
Oh,
she
okay.
sent thoughts ahead of time that we may kind of bring sprinkle throughout this meeting when relevant. So I think she was referring to our original district office's letter to our current council. And if folks remember that, it said, we recommend these 4 things. And then it had this whole history of your conversation to get there. And I think Lori was saying we don't need to do that now. So I think it's not applicable to our current recommendations document. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia. And following up, Lori did provide feedback since she's not in attendance that she agrees with all 3 bullets and assumes we will revise the recommendations to be just one rather than a commentary of how we are deliberating. Yes. Terry?
Yeah, if I understand what Amy just said, and I think, let me throw this out there. I think our current recommendation holds pretty well on district offices if we add something additional saying that District 1 needs more than that. Is that a reasonable interpretation? Because if so, I like it.
I can't remember if our present engagement, does our present one say something about a community engagement effort? I believe it does.
It does.
Yeah.
If I
But
can,
it doesn't.
Julia?
No, it has the robust community engagement process to assess programming Portlanders want in district, not specific to district offices, but certainly inclusive of district offices. What it doesn't do is capture bullet 2.
Right.
If I can add, some of the engagement report did bring things like community's thoughts on rotating town halls and using intergovernmental spaces like libraries and things like that. Those suggestions aren't captured in that. So perhaps we can add, obviously, the engagement report to that, or if we can add language of like, our community report brought forward these based on community. Does anyone disagree with that?
Destiny, go ahead and say that again. And
In the engagement report, there was ideas brought forward from the listening sessions and in comments that people said, I like the idea of having district offices, like when it had district offices, things like rotating community council meetings, going to town halls and libraries, like those ideas that were brought up. I think that would be great to add it to this bullet point of community feedback of such places here, which then requires ongoing programmatic or ongoing agenda items of identifying what programmatic needs can we do and is cost effective. Like that was all there. And it ties back into that meeting. Juliet?
I like that idea, and like Zach, I'm not sure what the original language was, but it needs to also say something about security.
Thank you, Juliet. Terry?
okay, so I'm the timekeeper here, and we have about 5 minutes to wrap this up. So what I'm hearing is actually what the bullets are showing now. That we have our current recommendation. We'll add that District 1 has bigger needs. There are other ideas around community spaces and rotating through districts that were suggested. But our original recommendation still holds. Is that a rough consensus? Okay. Thumbs up or something so that I can see them, and then
Can you say that again, Terry?
It's on the screen too now. I'm
Okay.
sorry, it's not written well, but conceptually, it's now the two new bolded bullets at the bottom.
Sure.
I mean, all the districts have specific needs. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. It's just that District 1s are maybe more acute or something. But they all have specific needs, and those are going to become more clear after the election.
Yes, and I see two new hands just went up. And so I'll take Jose's comment since he hasn't spoken. And Joe, if you could type yours in the chat.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add to what Juliet said, that we've been talking about District 1 having more needs. So to then say, oh, across all districts, it's kind of like what happens to District 1 all the time, right? So we really mean we need to do more for District 1. We shouldn't say rotate things across all districts. If we really mean let's just do things out east and out west, if not, we will fall into what's happened always. So
Thank you, Jose. Yes, Julia, I think that's the language, recognizing that District 1 needs more, something more profound, aka resources and acknowledgement. Joe, we're kind of low on time. Can you not type it?
Can I just say a process thing, which is, I think that we're all trying to balance what we said in our original recommendation, what was in the engagement, what the suggestion was, and we're not going to be able to get things right down to the,
Mhm.
So I imagine what's going to happen is that some subset of us are going to write something up, and we're going to have another chance to see that. And if we could just trust that that's going to happen, and that when we have a common understanding, we just sort of move on from there, because it really feels like we're in agreement, but want to make absolutely sure that we are. And I don't think we need to do that.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, we will gather these thoughts. And so far, nothing has been stricken from this first slide. There hasn't been any strong no's. And so we'll incorporate that into our draft that we send out to review. Thank you, Joe. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to talk about council committee revisions. Again, these are revisions that came up from the engagement to date and based on our recommendations. Please take a second to read it. It's broken down into 3 sections. First, the relationship to the advisory body. Second, the number of committees. And third, the number of members. So we will take these sections on the slide first here, 2 sections, which is the number of committees, numbers of members, and the relationship to advisory bodies. And then before we discuss those, please let us know if there's any additional revisions that we need to put up here to see if we want to put them in our final recommendations. Oh, see hands going up. I'm gonna pass it to Amy.
Yeah, I think these are captured in these revisions, but there's something that has been in my mind since Lori came to our last meeting, which is that how can we map our recommendations to the council? And I actually don't have like a strong idea, but I'm just wondering how we can do that, or if there's a way we can do that. Like these revisions do capture what we heard in the community engagement, but ultimately, like how are we leading to a product that they're going to be able to actually use? Or making recommendations. And that's probably a bigger question than this specific recommendation period. I just want to make sure that we kind of have that in our brains.
Thank you, Amy. I'll pass it to Terry.
Yeah, so a couple of these are mine, and I wanted to give you my perspective on how these came about. The first one, relationship to the advisory bodies. We heard a bunch of stuff about advisory bodies and how advisory bodies related to committees. And I, I think that was confusing the role of advisory bodies, frankly. That the new service areas in the executive branch need advisory bodies, and they should be generally reevaluated and aligned that way. But the committees themselves are representatives. They're the representative government. They are the sort of the representatives of the voters. So I wanted to get rid of the idea of advisory bodies to the council committees, because that came up, and that's where that came from. The second part, in the committees and the number of members, we heard that we were budget limited for committees, and they were considering 4 committees. I don't think that's enough. We also heard that our rationale needed to be stated more explicitly, so that's there. And I think, at least I thought that 6 committees was the sweet spot, and I still think it is. But hearing the input from the internal groups, I'm proposing we recommend 5 standing committees and have the budget and committee of the whole be the 6th committee. That removes the council president and vice president from committee work, which was commented by the internal folks, but it messes a little bit with how the council membership is distributed over the 5 committees. But that's, I think, kind of what Amy was talking about. We need to map this to the council. That's what I was trying to do. So those are the explanations of what's there that were my comments.
Thank you, Terry. I'm going to pass it to Zach. I don't think we've heard from Zach yet.
Hey, thanks, Destiny. So largely like responses to Amy and Terry's comments. So, you know, I agree that there needs to be some kind of wording to support the bridge to get to the ideal, but we should not be, this is the only advisory body that is in existence to recommend what the ideal should be for committees, for advisory bodies, and that kind of thing. And so I'm fine with like including some language that is kind of subtask recommendations that would support getting to the ideal. But I want to push back to the like, well, let's try to match to the realities and the limitations of our future council that has the budget for next year. Like I'm a no if we are revising and getting there. On the committee advisory piece, so the reason that I think we have this, and it's maybe just a word choice, right? But we heard pretty loud and clear that there needs to be the inclusion of voices outside of just those who are elected in committees. I am fine with us trying to change the wording so it's not an advisory body per se, but it's something to the effect of uplifting community voices in deliberation of policy in committees or something to that effect. And to that, I think that's the end of that thought process. And then on the last bullet point on the like 5 standing committees plus, like I guess I feel a little bit ambivalent of being overly explicit of the specific number. And maybe we go about this in a more nuanced way of saying that there should be sufficient committees to address the multitude of priorities that the city of Portland has uplifted as existing emergencies and priorities from community engagement. That might be more than the 4 existing committees that can be sufficiently staffed. And then we provide this list of like some suggestions and leave it at that. But I'm a little bit, I don't want to die on the hill of like speaking to a very specific number. And with that, I'll stop. Thanks.
Thank you, Zach. You're kind of leading into the topics area and jurisdictions, and we have till 11:42 to discuss this. Does anyone have specific comments on the relationship to advisory body and the number of committees and committee members that are holding here right now? Okay, I see Fred.
Thank you, Destiny. I agree that we shouldn't be talking about advisory bodies to the council and council committees. I liked Zach's language about uplifting voices. They're all public meetings, and but how they reach out and solicit comments within their particular subject areas is going to be based on the subject area and the populations likely to be affected thereby. As far as the number of committees, I also agree with Zach that the number of committees is not really much our business. We can recommend them. I do not want to use the word sweet spot and I had some language in mind that I shared with Terry earlier. I don't know whether it got incorporated or not, and it was to the effect that we need to acknowledge in our recommendations that the council's going to get to decide for themselves what committees they have, how they're staffed, if there's room for budget for staff, how they're comprised, who chairs them, how they're distributed, their membership is distributed amongst the 4 districts. It's really, I think we just need to recognize that, acknowledge that up front, so that the newbies, the candidates and those who get elected understand, yes, we know you've got the power, but why don't you listen to what we're recommending to you, because they make some sense. Why don't you
that recommendation is on the final slide, so it's more
all
forward.
right.
Okay.
So that's where I get to the number of committees. Ad hoc committees makes sense. And I agree with, I don't know that we need to
Yeah.
I don't think we need to go further. Thanks.
Okay. And then if we can move it to the next slide, because this is where we talk about topics, areas, and jurisdiction. Jose, I know you had a previous comment on the previous slide. I don't know if it ties into this one.
It doesn't. I've had a conversation with some staff members. It's all well and good that we're saying number of committees or whatever, but as of right now, there is no budget for committee staff. In our recommendations, there was one comment about appropriate resources, but that's tied in to something else, not staff. And I think that it would behoove us to mention in the number of committees section that a lot of this is going to be based on staffing. You can't make 6 committees, then have absolutely no staff in any of them, because then they won't be able to actually accomplish any work. So they're going to really be bound by the amount of staff they'll be able to prioritize money for these committees. I think that is a conversation we haven't had around committees, but I think it's an important one.
Thank you, Jose. Juanita?
Yes, I think I feel uncomfortable with the concept that we are concerned about that we don't name the number of committees that we feel is appropriate, because there was a lot of research that went through that for those recommendations. Not only the research through a number of cities, a very large number of cities, but also from what the public is talking. We've been listening from the public. So to me, the fact that we're saying, no, we cannot recommend a number, I think that especially because of what was just mentioned, that there are a group of people coming in that are newbies, that were called newbies, and they may not have a lot of experience. I think it's important that that's our role to say this will be the best way to structure this. It's up to them to do it or not to do it. But I think it's a responsibility to say, this is what we have learned through our research, through listening to the public, and this is our best recommendation. That's all. And so to me, also talking to the staff about, well, there's no money in the budget. Well, there's never a money in the budget. And we're going to go through a process where the budget is going to be probably changed because of all of the staffing, things that they're going to be looking at staffing and patterns throughout the organization. So we should leave that concept about the budget to the next city council. And they will decide. If they don't have money, they may not have any committees at all. But it's up to the decision. Our role is to recommend what we think based on what we learn, what we think is best. Thank you.
Thank you, Juanita. Okay, we only have 2 minutes left and we haven't got into topic areas and jurisdictions. If we could go back to the previous slide. Yes. And so right there, we've added additional topics to say there. Terry, is this a comment on the revisions?
This was to explain the next slide.
Okay.
If you're ready for that.
Yes, next slide, then.
Okay. So I think I heard loud and clear that our proposed committee names was not working. So I thought that also we should just be a little softer in that and revise our recommendations that we just support a strong committee system. There are pros and cons to aligning with service areas, and pros and cons to organizing by strategic priorities. There are the staffing constraints and workload balancing concerns. So we'd recommend a blend of those two approaches to jurisdictions. And then through planning and experience, we could evolve standing committee jurisdictions into the future. So that was a way to soften our recommendation and get around naming the committees. And then, talking about being explicit with jurisdictions, I just wanted to point out that the idea of a strong committee system is that legislation goes into a committee and it finds a committee. And sometimes it's just going to be the council president and the council itself to approve sending things to committee. And that's just going to be the way the process works. So I got wary of, if we're not even going to name the names of the committees, we can't really explain the jurisdictions either. So that's where all of this sort of stuff comes from.
Yeah.
Thank you, Terry, for the framing. Zach?
So I appreciate that effort of trying to soften and not be so articulate on what the specific areas could be. I guess my main point is that number 2 there, I don't want us to just say there's pros and cons and then leave it at that. I feel like we need to articulate it so that we can dip into the well of own personal expertise and what we've heard to articulate it, because otherwise it's basically just giving them free license to decide whatever they want. And I think we're here to advise, and so like let's clearly articulate the pros and cons of both. And we don't have to have a specific recommendation of one or the other, but I think doing that groundwork of explicitly articulating those pros and cons will help them make an informed decision.
As timekeeper, Destiny, we're kind of up on this topic.
Absolutely. Okay, I just want to make sure that we've bolded the things that we have reaffirmed in the last two, and there wasn't anything that was really stricken regarding council committees. I'm wondering though, because there is that acknowledgement of being aligned to the strategic priorities and the committee names, are we going to stay prescriptive or are we not going to stay prescriptive, I think is the question. Because
I repeat back what I've heard, my bolding. Ruby, if you can try to hit refresh again, sometimes it's hard to live edit slide decks. So under the advisory bullet point, it's uplift, again, please don't focus on the words so much. Conceptually, uplifting community voices in deliberation of policy and council committees. So not like advisory bodies connected to council committees. Under number of committees and number of members, we're okay with, council doing ad hoc committees as necessary. We're going to soften the language about 6 committees, but also include our rationale for like the thinking that went into that. I think Joe put it actually in the chat well, and also make sure we talk about the relationship to staffing and the need for increased staffing to get to what we think is right. And to, I think it was Juanita's point, the pure city research and what we learned there. And then on the next slide for topic areas and jurisdictions, also less prescriptive on the names of the committees, but the pros and cons with Zach's point about actually sharing what those are, sharing our research again, limitations of staffing, the connection with strategic planning, and the relationship between these are legislative priorities as distinct from executive functions.
I see thumbs up.
Thanks.
Sounds good. Okay. So we're good temperature check. Okay, now we can move on to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So now we're going to talk about non-agenda communications at council. I'm going to pause again for 20 seconds so that folks can review the proposed recommendations on the slide. I see some hands up. So before we discuss these revisions on the slide, does anyone have any additional revisions based on the final engagement report? Throw up your hands like this if you do have an additional one, just so that I know. Okay, no one's raised their hand twice. So I'm gonna start with Zach.
I might have an addition. Sorry. So I saw a lot of these as like kind of opposing. So I think my general thought is not to expand the non-agenda communication at the front of the meetings. It's important to have it at the front. It's then time certain. People can know to plan on when they can present, and agendas aren't cut short because they have a time certain public comment to break that. I think acknowledging that there's this desire for expanding an opportunity for communications, there's the other route is like with town halls and other ways to like lean into the reality that our counselors who are now full-time are required to be full-time legislators. And so to increase town halls to have that public comment heard, I think is the solution here, and not to have it be this like monopolized time for non-agenda communication during times in which people are probably not even available to provide public comment, especially for those who are historically not heard from council. So that would be kind of my amendment, maybe, or maybe it's just a bolstering of that second full bullet point.
Thank you, Zach. I'm going to pass it to Fred. Fred, you're muted. Sorry.
I'm all for the second bullet and don't think that we need to deal further with non-agenda communications. Just retain the opportunity, let the council figure out what they're going to do with it. I don't think that I just don't think our research shows any reason to expand or limit it. I don't know how you would logistically increase the time and prioritize comments made by individuals historically not heard from in council, because it's kind of first come, first serve. The frequent flyers, yeah, I think that's a time limit for each comment, and because there are folks that show up every day, every council session, and pretty much say the same thing. I know we did that. We had that at county board meetings as well, 30, 40 years ago. It's still the problem. So I could like just retaining the second bullet. I think that's great.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Terry and then Jose.
Yeah, the second bullet was mine, trying to thread between what we had heard. I'm not a big fan of these generalized comments, but I came around based on some of the engagement that we heard. So, but to Zach's comment, I think maybe I need to eliminate the last phrase or something, with the hopes I would edit my own to say, to strike the so that it becomes less necessary can be discontinued or no. Just with the hopes that access to counsel is sufficiently improved through other reforms. Period.
That's great.
Thank you, Terry. Jose.
I just want to touch on what Fred said, and I think maybe we should spell it out. The third bullet of the under time allotted is actually my favorite bullet, and I think we should put it should not be first come first serve. Just because it's always been done that way, doesn't mean it should always be done. There should be a priority to people who have never been there before, or with groups that are impacted by whatever they're being talked about, more than someone who's there every single meeting saying the exact same thing. So maybe we should call it out and say that we recognize this is different than the norm, but I think it would be better for the city.
Thank you, Jose. I raised my hand and I was specifically wanting to also acknowledge the feedback that a lot of people raised, that having specific time allotments, even from individual commenters, is really hard for needs of translation or accommodation for needs. So I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that there needs to be a little bit of flexibility with time, again, not just for people who have not been heard that are there, but also people who might need translation, someone speaking and then translating back, or, computer delays or things like that, people with accessibility needs, whatever they may be, speech delays, things like that. And I also don't agree that should be first come, first serve if you're physically there present, or just new ways. Terry?
I'm just trying to figure out how to wrap this up in the next 4 minutes or so. I think there are lots of good ideas around this, and I like, in our research, some places didn't have it at all. Some places had invited testimony before the council meetings. And I like, being able to prioritize people who haven't been there before. But if you have language like that, Jose, maybe send it to us or whatever. I'm just trying to figure out how to include that.
Can I read? Kind of summarize, I think, what I've heard from folks. So we're retaining non-agenda item communications, not recommending that the time be expanded, talking about increasing other opportunities for non-agenda item communication to city council, like through things like town halls, and exploring alternatives to first come, first served systems.
Yes, Joe?
So I would just add to what Julia said that in our original recommendation, we also point out that committee meetings will provide opportunities. So, that's in addition to town halls and regular council meetings. I think the current practice is first come, first serve, but that people can only speak like once a month. There's a limit on how frequently people can speak. And I think that somebody just said that we ought to make accommodations for special needs like translation. And I think that's really important. And just to be clear, I think we all are, this is non-agenda communication. This isn't invited testimony. This isn't on agenda items. This is people who have something they want to say to council that's not on the agenda.
Thank you, Joe. It seems like there's also support for outside of non-agenda comments, but also invited testimony as well in other spaces and forums. Okay, that feels good. That's a great dialogue. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Terry to talk about recommendations for future city leaders.
Okay, so changing topics, but not really changing topics. These are sort of the other revisions that we felt like didn't need full-blown discussions. So we'll run through those now. Next slide. We have them in categories. And it's going to be engaging with city government, setting up the council in the new government, participating in the budget processes, and some other miscellaneous things. We've got about 13 minutes for each. Next slide. All right, we need to catch up. So starting with engaging with city government, here are some revisions. I'll pause for 30 seconds or so you can take a look. Okay. These are Juanita's. I guess I should invite Juanita to talk about them for a minute or two. Get started here.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Terry. I just wanted to add some more clarification to the recommendation with very specific examples of what can be done to ensure that the recommendation is to have the community engagement embedded in our new government's culture. So that will facilitate basically that. And I think that the recommendation to develop a citywide community engagement plan is also recommended, and then and within that to have the budget process to the budget development plan for community engagement also is two pieces. But in this piece, I just decided to just leave it to in terms of the overall city engagement.
Any comments, discussion on these or new ones in this category? Fred?
Yes, I like those first two suggestions, Juanita. The third one is problematic to me because of the interface between council and the executive branch. And so planning and development projects and initiatives, even a communication hub, but especially collaboration with city departments becomes, I think, by delegating that to or empowering community-based organizations, CBOs, to implement and coordinate key functions just seems like we're adding a third component, like a mediator or intermediation between the city administration and the city council through these district functions. It's just I think it's probably not something I can't accept it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the feedback, Fred. The reason I think when we talk about community engagement, and my understanding is that the present system, the way it exists, is like the neighborhood coalitions and the neighborhood associations. That's precisely what they're doing, isn't it? To do work into their communities, find out what projects they want to implement. They want to know, they communicate with the city departments, if there's a lot of holes on the roads. So that's basically the same thing. You see, so to me, but at the same time, it has to be with an approach that is coordinated. Somebody needs to coordinate that, because who is going to do that? I mean, right now, based on what we hear from the city life, the department that oversees all of the neighborhood associations, we don't know what's going on with them.
Yeah.
They're in disarray. They're totally in disarray. So
Yeah.
who's going to do that? We're going to have districts now. In that district, it will make sense for the city to have somebody who will coordinate that, who will have organize the meetings for the three commissioners in that district to do some type of that work. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it can be somebody, as contracts to do that type of work. But otherwise, there's nothing in the infrastructure that would support that type of effort.
I like the addition, I think, that what Julia probably added to the second bullet that obviates the third one, which goes into a lot of detail. But I think we're almost missing some verb, Juanita, in the third one.
What would you add, or what it would be missing?
Coordinate district's key functions, community engagement functions.
Community advocacy.
Yeah, districts districts coordinate key functions. I would I don't know. I don't know. I just like adding community-based organizations when considering the initial framework for community engagement up above. Community engagement, I think, does include all of those specifics, as you say, with neighborhood associations, considering my own. But there's also yeah. Right now I'm in the district where we're getting the Interstate Bridge Advisory Committee, and we're being asked to testify in that, and the neighborhood association isn't taking a position on that. that certainly affects Northeast Portland.
Yeah.
So I'm ambivalent about it.
So do you want to take out district key functions out of it?
Yeah, the key
Yeah,
functions.
just implement and coordinate functions such as.
Okay,
Okay, thank you, Brett. That's
thank
very
you.
helpful.
Thank you.
Other comments on this? I'm less of a fan of that third bullet, just as that's a list of things that might be too much. And we might be missing things there. Like what does seem to be missing is a district level orientation to community engagement, just generally. And that may or may not fit in the second bullet too, but I kind of like the first two bullets. I'm not a fan of that third one.
Yeah, I talked to 3 different cities, St. Paul, San Diego, and San Francisco, when I was looking in what did they do for community engagement and what kind of infrastructure they had. And so that was one of the things that they specifically mentioned as part of their community engagement. And then specifically, I like the model in St. Paul, Minnesota. And that was the most progressive, I thought, and the most well-structured in terms of giving it the support in the community level for the community to have somebody to bring them together and support those type of activities. It doesn't mean that they have to do those activities, but they're just examples, such as, and maybe a lot of other different things. But anyway, thank you so much for the feedback, Terry.
Destiny, then Joe.
Thank you, Terry. I'm wondering if in there, I don't know if this is the best place to put it, but from something from the community engagement report was clarity on how counselors themselves would engage in district engagement. I'm wondering if there's a way we could put a bullet that, like, as part of this develop citywide community engagement plan, like we should also develop some type of way counselors engage as the 3 of them in their district, but also counselors engaging in other parts of the cities that are not in their districts. That was even a question brought up. So I think that kind of feedback and like exploration needs to be in here.
We have other recommendations in our engaging with city government stuff. So I think a lot of that is captured there. But Joe.
Well, what Terry just said, I think, might obviate what I was going to say, but it seems to me that there are 2 different things here. One is that there are some kinds of engagement that are geographic, and, we're talking about doing those on a district basis. There are others that aren't geographic, and there are community-based organizations that are not geographically based, but based on, a whole variety of interests and identities. And it seems to me that one really critical thing in the third bullet is the option of contracting with community-based organizations of both kind, both geographic and non-geographic. And I don't know what's already captured in our recommendations, but I'd like to capture both of those things.
Okay, any more discussion on this? I guess we can try and capture that. Julia, do you have a working?
Yeah, I think I'll say it aloud. I think that this is just adding to one recommendation in this section, engaging with city government. So we're adding developing a citywide community engagement plan. We're adding taking advantage of Portland's neighborhood associations, coalitions, and community-based organizations. And we're investigating contracting with community-based organizations regarding geographic and non-geographic community engagement functions. And I have a note, but I don't think it's a revision, just to make sure that somewhere else, which it is in our recommendations, is this idea about council in general engaging in their districts and engaging citywide outside of their districts.
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good to me. Any last minutes comments before we go on to the next one? No, then let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now we're engaging with city government. I'm going to pause a few seconds before we dive into this one. Okay, let me sort of start at the top and invite Juliet to comment on hers there.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. This just goes back to the sort of beefing up of 311, and also whatever's going to happen to the website, which I think is kind of an unknown at this point. I did talk to Michael Jordan about this, and he said that that 311 tells them that it will interface cleanly with the website web platform. But I also, and then the third part is that budgeted for, or is this down the road that they're going to be able to do this? You know, we haven't really talked about it nor seen a demo of 311 enough for me to really feel like I understand what's going on there. So I hope that's clear.
Let me get Zach. Do you want to weigh in on yours here too before I talk to Destiny?
Yeah, sure, Terry. So for the recommendation two, this is a new bullet point, and it's based off of my own personal experience, but also from conversations with ERCO and community groups who have an advocacy arm, right? Which there's the city of Portland has their process of sharing agendas, having meeting summaries and materials is just so inaccessible, and also like the agenda items even themselves are inaccessible in its language, is the feedback we got from ERCO. So structurally and in its write-up. And so this is just kind of just calling out that recommendation, and I'm happy to do a little bit of very brief research, but basically recommending several other, cities to look at and tools to look at that will make that process a lot easier for the city to potentially adopt in the future. And then recommendation 4, that's amending or adding to the first bullet, which is encourage, facilitate, and solicit diverse perspectives and lived experiences in decision-making processes. So this was largely the kind of like tacked onto one of the conversations we had earlier, which was one of the ways, right, to get non-agenda items uplifted and getting participation through doing in-district activities. So that's kind of what that recommendation 4 amendment is.
Okay, thanks. Destiny.
Thanks. Kind of like what Juliet was saying, I support all of these recommendations, and also that allocate appropriate funding for appropriate technology. And number 2 is very important for committee and council meetings rotating, because that's a budget cost. Like in the comments from the engagement report, that's also a staffing cost and things with security. I think we also, while we can't be like some people say we need to give a number, but then there's that whole back of they can decide what they want to do. I think as an advisory body, highly recommending that they do it wherever feasible, acknowledging that it will cost, and you would need to prioritize funding for technology and staffing accordingly to really engage Portlanders not heard from before. I think is key. Like in a demonstration, if that's really your priority. Because streaming online, I could imagine from somewhere else could be costly if there's no technology available.
Other comments? Okay, I'm hearing sort of general support here. That I wanted to mention, I think Austin had some really good council agenda packet things. So I might go take a look and see if I can dig those up and see and give them some specific ideas here. Anything else on this? Julia, do you have all this captured?
I basically just bolded this entire thing. I mean,
Perfect.
generally, conceptually, and also just the only addition to this slide being the recognition that Zach's final bullet on this slide also has sort of funding, technology, staffing needs questions to it. Thanks.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is setting up the government. I'll pause a little bit here so you can see where we're at and come back to it in a few seconds. Okay, so let me just sort of start this one off, and it's the recommendation number 1, and we heard it in the committee discussion earlier, but I think we might want to revisit our council staffing recommendation. One, to just re-emphasize it clearly, cleanly, and in this report too, that it's not staffed, the council's not staffed well enough. We need to be more in line with other jurisdictions. The other thing that came through in our research and that we didn't really capture elsewhere, that council, I think, is going to need a legislative director position, which is different from the council operations manager. The council president's job is going to be impossible to do with just a council operations manager who is answering to all the requests from all the rest of the council. It needs to be, you know, I don't want to say partisan, but a political position attached to the legislative or to the council, the council president's office. Anyway, so that is that recommendation. And Juanita, I'll invite you to talk about your other recommendations here.
Thank you, Terry. Yeah, we were talking again about creating the best environment for the new council to work as a team. And so I'm just, I think I submitted these recommendations already as part of the addendum to the other recommendations that were approved before when we submitted the overall pieces. I don't remember what they were called, but anyway, so many papers that we send out that I get confused with it. But anyway, so it's basically very specifically saying what steps can be taken to ensure that the new council has an opportunity to work together and to do some work prior to starting in January 1st. As I stated there, there's going to be a very overwhelming time when they come in starting January 1st, and they will be overwhelmed with information and things that they will need to be doing right away. So I think it's important that the process starts before. And I think that the staff has already indicated that they are open to this recommendation, but I want to make sure that we actually give some specific examples of what things can be happen or can be done to support the team building for the new council. I don't know if you have questions about it.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, I'd like to sort of speak to both of those. Regarding the legislative director, I think that we really need to think about how the council is staffed. I didn't submit anything earlier because I just had a conversation yesterday that led me to understand that the key person that council is supposed to rely on is the city administrator. And that doesn't exactly make sense because the city administrator is responsible to the mayor through the assistant city administrator. The council needs to have somebody who is, their point person that they can rely on to have loyalty to them and to nobody else. And I think we really need to think through that. I agree with the legislative director as well, but I think there's a bigger question about how the council is staffed so they can be as effective as possible. And then regarding the team building and goal setting, Juanita and I have been around this block again and again and again. I totally agree that there should be team building before January 1st. I think the goal setting ought to happen after January 1st. There's a ton of stuff that needs to happen before January, and I don't think that we should add another.
Yeah, can I just clarify that? Thank you, Joe, for the feedback. When we're talking about setting goals, I'm not talking about goals for the city. You see that you're right. They're going to have plenty of time. Plus, there's also recommendations to having a strategic planning, which is what you're talking about, Joe. The strategic planning, and so a multi-year strategic planning to be able to use it as a springboard for developing the budget. That is a different piece. This is only team building. And this is talking about goals is for themselves as a team. It's nothing to do with the running of the city. It's just by themselves as a team. To talk about, for example, we have our roles that we voted for, and we agree with that to follow them, to run our meetings. And it will be something similar like that. And I don't want to say exactly what it's going to be because all depends on who did they hire to do the training and the facilitation. It's not really a training, it's a facilitation meeting with very specific goals that they will need to achieve, but it's for their own working as a team, not for the city, Joe. And I think that's been the main concern that we haven't been able to clarify, because you keep on coming back and saying there is like they will be able after January, they will do their goals. Well, that's for the city. This is just a way to facilitate their working as a team. That's all. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for the feedback again.
Destiny, then Jose.
Thank you. I do like the idea of a legislative position. I looked online and it seems like that's on a federal level, and I was looking for examples of a city level. So maybe if we could add some examples, that would be great. Just to reaffirm that we would like that. I also want to be nervous about de-siloing again, and it's we want somebody so that they can work in close collaboration and coordination with the city administrator. I think that language is much more persuasive, and it also supports the council to be effective in their work. On recommendation 2, I'm kind of confused, first of all, because I feel like we have our onboarding recommendations. I agree with all of this because I feel like that is the sentiment in our onboarding recommendations. I think the team goal setting, to me, I think we haven't reaffirmed why we think an outside facilitator is important, because they are disconnected from the city. They can push a little harder to ensure that the council works together and challenges them like a city staff couldn't do. So that kind of language. But I think goal setting for a team is more, how are we going to practice together in our districts? Those kind of areas that people have brought up. how are we going to work together in committees? How are we going to do town halls? I think if we wrote that in, that makes it clearer, at least for me as well, because that's how I would read it. And I don't know how, if this is separate from our onboarding, but this is like the sentiment I voted for and kind of what I see as well. That was missing in that original.
Okay, Jose.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of be a little different than what everyone was saying. While I agree that team building is important, I am hard pressed to add requirements before January 2025 because these people have jobs. We don't know how much money they make, who can take an extra day, and they already have so many things going on. And I don't want to add requirements like a whole day retreat when there's already so much that's going on. They're already doing a lot of team building, a lot of the candidates even now. So I would keep it more general where like I could see us stressing the need for team building, but saying something like a 1-day retreat or do this every 3 months. I'm not sure I agree with that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Jose. I kind of agree with everybody. I think team building is a good idea. It's important. But if we could just maybe generalize it in recommendation 2 a little bit. The next slide actually has recommendations on other goal setting things that we need to talk about. But my preference would be to distill this into saying council team building around what Destiny said is important. The council should do it very early as they can, facilitate it if possible, that sort of thing. That would be my preference. But more discussion on this. Okay, let's go to the next slide real quick. I'll come back to you, Juliet. And so this was my way of trying to capture, there's a lot of planning and strategic planning and budget planning and everything. I was going to try and capture this in the last sub-bullet there, that to begin this process, they need to assess and scope strategic planning needs for city operations, for budgets, for midterm, long-term budgeting, and for the council itself. They need to assess and scope that like immediately. Then identify and allocate the funding for these efforts and then begin immediately. So I think that tries to capture both Juliet's and Juanita's bullets prior to that. But Juliet.
Just going back to what you said before, I agree with everyone. And to make it more general, this is about the team building. Maybe it just needs to talk about team building opportunities rather than being so specific about a 1-day retreat, etc. Thank you.
Juanita.
Yes, thank you, Terry. I heard in terms of starting the strategic planning, I read some of the comments regarding that maybe they will be too busy to start immediately with the strategic planning process. But the way I look at that process or the way when they start in January, I don't think that the city council needs to be itself involved in the strategic planning in the very beginning. Like Terry says, there's steps that needs to be taken to determine the scope and how that is going to be implemented. And I think that the city administrator's job will be to start investigating and with his team start talking about what are the steps that are going to be needed to take for the strategic planning. That is also a recommendation that is made in the budget report that we received. They also recommended to have a strategic planning started immediately in January. So that's where I come from. That I think it is right now the city doesn't have a basis for planning for budget development at all. And I think it's really important that at least they starting putting the system in place to start the strategic planning process. So anyway, I think I'm repeating myself too much. I will leave it there.
Okay, how about Joe then Destiny?
So I agree that strategic planning is a really important thing for them to do. There's no way they can do that as their first act of business. We won't have a city administrator. We'll still have an interim city administrator if the mayor chooses to keep that person, or the mayor may choose to appoint someone else as interim city administrator, but we're not going to have a city administrator in place for a while. Needs to be recruited, appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council. And I don't think there's any way to squeeze that into the budget timeline for the first year. I think strategic planning is really important, but this is another area where I don't think we can be overly prescriptive.
Destiny.
I agree. I think it's crazy. Like, to me, I would be shocked to start a new government and then talk about strategic planning as we're figuring out and equipping the new government in every area. And I also want to acknowledge that we are technically at time. So like maybe 3 more minutes here.
Other comments on this? Again, I think I was trying to capture things, softly there in that last one, acknowledging all the constraints. Maybe if we put this is just assessing and scoping and funding is what they need to do immediately.
Yeah.
But Fred.
Yeah, I agree. They don't need to do it immediately. They don't even, half of them won't even know all of the aspects of the city in order to strategically plan. So I think we're being far too prescriptive here, Terry. Yes, they should have a strategic planning process. Michael Jordan's already suggested that. And I don't think we need to be more specific, other than they need to work it out with the city administrator and the mayor of how they would proceed to do it eventually, knowing that the new city administrator won't be on board for months.
Okay, Juanita, last comments here.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Terry. Yeah, I think that although I agree with the comments regarding the fact that there's not going to be a city administrator and there would be the council will be really busy. I don't think it is the council responsibility to start in January and start the strategic planning, process, but it's part of the team, the administrative team, the executive team to do that. And so if we don't say that, put it, and again, these are recommendations, they may do it and they may not. However, I think it's important that this is one of the core things that a city needs to be able to function. Any organization needs to be able to function. And that is the reason why the city is in the situation that it finds itself today, because there's no systems, there's no planning, there's no budget planning, there's nothing. So I think it's important that we say it, that this is a priority. And we can say it can be started in December if we want to. Doesn't mean that it's going to start in December. But I think that the sooner the better. And if we're saying as sooner as starting in the year, the first things that they need to be doing, they need to start doing those steps. That's my personal opinion. Again, that's how you resolve all of the other little problems, by having a plan and a strategic plan in a direction where the city is going, because that plan is going to include all of the stuff and all of the things that they have to do to implement all of the changes. So this is the big picture. And if we just leave it alone and say, well, whenever you have time, because you don't have a city administrator until July or maybe until December of next year, then you don't have to worry about it. Well, we're just saying, yeah, let's keep on doing the same thing, the same way we have always done it. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Jose, like 10 seconds or something?
Yeah, real quick. I understand and I agree with parts of Juanita's saying, but I think it's counterproductive for a team to start strategic planning when that whole team is going to change in a few months. Like the strategic plan needs to be done with the new mayor and their new city administrator and the new deputies, not started by a different group before.
Okay, that we have like 6 or 7 minutes to do a bunch of slides here, so I'm going to move on. I think I've captured the gist. I think I understand the gist of where we need to be on this. So next slide, please. Okay, so these are related to the new budget process. And I think there are, let's see, we have a couple slides on the budget process. So let me sort of say, we need to do this somewhat quickly. And I think some of Juanita's ideas here were extracted from the draft budget and finance staffing process and the transition consultants report. I think my preference is the third bullet on this slide is to make a sort of generalized statement about that we endorse a lot of those recommendations that are in that report, which was very solid. They map very well on our other recommendations on the budget. So I think that might help consolidate a lot of Juanita's on this slide and the next slide. But let me open it up for discussion, at least on this first of the slide. Anybody want to comment here? Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. And like I said, all of these come out of that consultant's report. And again, I think they're all pretty good. I just don't know that we need to go through it in the specifics again. So, Juanita, you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Terry. Yes, when I read the final report from the budget, the final report that Julia just sent us recently, they mention our recommendations as the GTAC in the report. It's a 95-page report, close to 100 pages report. And so it's a very, there's a lot of things that, so when I thought about what are the things that are the critical pieces, since they already also using all reports and all recommendations is included in their report, I felt that out of 100 pages, or close to 100 pages, picking up the things that are the most critical pieces that will facilitate the new structure for the city and the planning process is critical that we included it, because that way it's in two different pieces. We're just supporting each other. The budget report is supporting our recommendations. We're supporting the most important, the key recommendations that the budget report is making. And I thought about that too. I thought, well, it's repetition, it's repetitious. It is, maybe I should just leave it there, but who is going to read 100 pages report to find the recommendations that are the most critical? So that's my thinking behind adding those bullets, because those bullets are things that I consider very, very critical. And I'm willing to, listen to you guys, and you want to remove things, it's up to you. But that's my thinking behind that. I think that the more clear and more specific we are about our recommendations and what we think are the most important and that want to have the greatest impact in the transition and in establishing the new government next year, starting next year, the better. Thank you, Terry.
Okay, thank you, Juanita. And I agree. I think what we might be able to do here is put, again, sort of a one bullet about that. There's that draft consultants report that hits some of these things without going on too long, if that's sort of acceptable. It'll take some drafting though. We can't do at the moment.
Yeah, I'm willing to take some things out that I don't, and then people also feel free to recommend what are the things that you think shouldn't be included. But I think that some of the pieces that are very important to be mentioned.
Right. Fred.
No, thank you, Terry, for taking that on. But again, I would caution us that they can't begin a first order of business of a strategic planning process until the new city administrator's in. Perhaps that's not true because the mayor and the acting city administrator and the acting budget director, whoever should be alerting the council to how to prepare for the 26-27 budget. Even though they'll be halfway through and I have to probably adopt sight unseen the 25-26 FY budget. So, but I don't know about the last bullet about a direct line of authority and communication. Are we saying that the current trial organization where the budget offices is within a service area under fiscal services, et cetera, is insufficient, even because there's a deputy city administrator between the mayor and between the city and, well, this, I don't know that's, I can't, I'm not enthusiastic about making a recommendation of that. I think that there's going to be plenty of communication. It's more important, I think, that the deputy city the city administrator has the communications centrality to it. That's going to be important.
Yeah, let me comment really quickly on that, and then just sort of suggest that
thank you.
We refer this to some drafting that I'm happy to take the lead on because I went through it pretty carefully. But on that last point, the consultant's report has a implementation timeline, which I think was excellent. And we should sort of adopt it kind of by reference.
Right.
But that includes some of these dates and times and stuff. And the other thing too that was going on through that report is that the budget office is now in a difficult spot of having to give independent advice to both branches of government. And so that was sort of where that line of authority and communication is coming from, that having to go through a deputy administrator in a service area when also going directly to the council is a difficult spot for the budget office. But anyway, let me see if we can just refer this to drafting, because I think all of this stuff is great, and we just need to make it a little less prescriptive and detailed, and again, acknowledging what's on the next slide. So let me go to the next slide. Okay. Or the slide after this one, I guess. So these are like our final revisions, and Fred's comment here that Fred sort of opened the meeting up with, I think is really important. Acknowledging we in our recommendations need to be really good about acknowledging the fact that we aren't decision makers. Both the council and the new administrator and the new mayor all are going to be making these decisions. So we need to acknowledge all that in our recommendations. We need to be careful of that in our staffing. Any other final last minute recommendations, revisions that we need to consider? Okay, because we're wearing you all out, and we have to do a roll call on this. But Destiny,
I also want to highlight and support Lori's addition of why we came down to the topics that we did. In conjunction with that, I feel like once we say this is your prerogative, this is what we researched, and then rewrite it to be very persuasive in language, I think would be great. So, awesome work, everyone.
Jose's got his hand up.
yeah, Jose.
So we're doing a roll call, but how do we know what we're voting on? Because we've talked about recommendations and some of us said take some stuff out, and so I don't know how I'd vote.
Do you want me to go back over it or?
Yeah, I mean, I'll very quickly. What we're voting on is basically the stuff that we looked at a month ago in our meeting, and we made some revisions then. So it's that document, and then everything we did today. And what we did today is captured in Julia's notes here. And Julia, if you want to take a minute or two to run through them, but it's the whole package, Jose.
Yeah, but like for instance, when we're talking about asking things to happen before January 1st, I feel like a lot of people agreed that we should take it out, but I actually don't know if it was taken out or not because
I can go through real quick.
Okay.
If it's, and again, if you just kind of conceptually take this and again, you'll see the draft in a few days and can weigh in on the verbiage.
Oh yeah, because
So-
we have to vote again as the whole committee, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. So
okay,
again,
never
like,
mind. Never.
okay,
Yeah.
because no, Jose is 100% right. So what you're doing right now is kind of head nodding. It was like your thumbs up along the way. I think we've got it. Also, I have the recording, so I can kind of double check. I know there's a lot of comments in the chat, probably all of which I didn't read, right? So there may be some nuance in some of the writing that we haven't kind of talked about verbally. But yeah, so right now you're voting sort of conceptually to forward the recommendations as revised based on your conversation today to the full GTAC, of which you are a majority. Right, for the full committee's consideration, deliberation, and voting at the September 11th GTAC meeting. So are folks okay then with me not going back over? Seeing head nods. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, then I guess we're, let's go on to the next slide. And the next slide. And so here's where we are. It's a big, slightly bigger than a head nod to the whole package. Any last minute comments before we pull it to a vote? Once, twice, Destiny.
Just to reiterate, we're going to take these notes. We're going to draft a review to send to everyone here to review it again, incorporating what we talked about last time, incorporating what we talked this one. And we'll have like a short turnaround window over the weekend to update and provide your feedback. But then we will provide that feedback and all of it to GTAC. So you'll have like a little bit over a week to go over it again. But we hope you get us back your edits before then.
Cool.
Hey, Destiny, this is where I turn it over to Destiny so that Destiny can turn it over to Julia for the roll call.
Yes. So
You can
again,
also read. I can populate if someone wants to read.
oh, you want me to read them?
Go for it.
Okay, I will read the members. And so when I call your name, please thumbs up, unmute to let me know your vote or sideways or down. Okay, Amy Randall,
Yes.
Yes. Me, yes. Fred,
Yes.
yes. Joe, oh, is not here, absent. Jose,
Yes.
yes. Juanita,
Yes.
yes. Juliet,
I,
yes. Lori's absent. Terry,
Yes.
Zach,
Congratulations, facilitators. Great job, all.
Great.
I'm a yes.
that's amazing. Thank you all. It was a really good dialogue. I'm really proud of us
Yeah.
and like how much we've incorporated. So awesome work. I will be out of contact for tomorrow until Wednesday. Okay, Fred. So you'll probably just see the finalized reviewed draft
Right.
before GTAC.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Destiny and Terry
Yeah. And Julia,
and Julie. Yeah,
You guys.
please.
and Julie, of course, as always.
Fabulous work, Julia. Okay, so that
Okay.
was a resounding yes. I will ask for next slide, please. Here we go. So on
Okay.
Friday, we will we'll distribute the revised recommendations for your review again. Any edits will be due Monday, September 2nd. Remember that. The document will be distributed to GTAC on Wednesday, September 4th. That tight turnaround. Next slide, please. The recordings of this meeting will be posted on the committee's website and is available after the meeting ends on the Office of Management and Finance YouTube channel. The Voter and Candidate Education and Outreach Subcommittee meets on September 9th. The next full GTAC meeting is September 11th. This will be the final meeting of the District and Council Operations Subcommittee and Budget Work Group. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Again, I want to thank everyone for your participation today. The challenging, the reclarifications, it was really great to hear everybody. Also, the trust and the sentiments was shared. Thank you to Julia. Always, oh my God, the things her beautiful mind creates and gets us all together is awesome. So thank you to Terry as well.
Thanks, everybody. This was a tough thing to get through, and I appreciate everybody's work
yeah.
the whole way.
Yeah. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.